All right, so apologies for the slight technical difficulties. Apparently, if you change your password, then it also needs to be changed in the streaming software as well. Not super surprising. All right, so today we are going to be doing a cybersecurity bootcamp, part 1. It doesn't say part 1, but this is part 1. So we're going to be covering at a high level what are some different aspects of defensive security specifically. Again, high level being what is X used for, how is it applicable to industry, things like that. What are things to consider when doing said practice or said topic? Yes.
Is it one of the laptops from up here?
Yes.
What is the
On the board. Student and Auburn.
Also, I don't think you're streaming. Yeah, not seeing it. Not seeing it.
You're not seeing it?
Negative.
Okay, well, give me a second. Let me see. It might be private again because it likes to do that. Stand by. But well, I guess I can go ahead now. But yeah, so just again, high level topic. We're not talking super. Let's get granular on how this various things work, and just kind of introduce you to a lot of different things that we will probably try and cover throughout the next entire year. If I give you a URL, can you go to it? https://u2.be. Then slash. It's just u2.be, like it does that weird split on YouTube. Slash capital Q, lowercase j, capital L, lowercase o, lowercase r, 718, capital Q, 8. Where'd you lose that? All right. 718. 718.
So it's LOR 718. Oh wow.
Tell me if that link works. If that link works, post it in the Discord. It doesn't work? QJ.
Wait, I want to spell something wrong. Okay, so
I don't understand what this thing, like, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it says we're live. Oh, it's private. You idiot thing. Okay, it now should be public. If you ever dealt with YouTube as a YouTube Live, it's just kind of painful. It always wants to set things as private. I don't know. I've used Twitch before. I don't know if anybody else has streamed anything, but Twitch is a little more intuitive in my opinion. But YouTube has, where they keep the videos indefinitely. So.
You can't keep bots on Twitch.
Well, you can. I mean, like.
They get auto-deleted after X amount of time.
Yes.
Unless you.
Yeah. So you would have to pull something off of Twitch, then upload it to somewhere like YouTube or to your own website or something. All right. Check the link in the thing now. Is it working? Okay. All right. Well, I'm gonna say what I just said a minute ago for everybody that's online. So we're going to be doing cybersecurity bootcamp this week. Just a high-level overview of defensive topics. We're going to cover a really wide variety. Again, each of these specific topics we could spend weeks on. And we're going to spend 5 minutes. So you're just getting a little glimpse. This is just kind of give you a little bit of an idea, again, at a high level of what is this topic. Am I interested? Do I have potential to be interested in it, or is it completely uninteresting to me? So that's kind of the goal, to pique your interest and again, educate you on just basics of each topic. So last week we talked about the CIA triad briefly. I thought I'd bring that up again this week. It's important to consider that all three of these things, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, all play into defensive security. We need things to be confidential. We need things to be what they say they are, what the original is. We don't need things to be modified in the middle. We also need availability. We don't need things to be super slow. We need it to be relatively fast and not insanely hard to get to. So again, all of those things are important. It's also important to remember trade-offs. Trade-offs are going to happen. They exist. And it's, where do you want to allow trade-offs? Do you want to allow your employees to visit YouTube, or do you want to blacklist YouTube? Trade-offs there. Well, maybe there's a security video or a programming video that they're looking that actually pertains to their job. Or maybe they're watching, I don't know, Dr. Disrespect stream on Twitch or on YouTube or something, Again, trade-offs. What's valuable there?
And, every time you see the CIA triad, the A changes what it stands for.
Yes.
I don't know why.
Yeah, so it'll be availability, it'll be authenticity,
I like accessibility.
accessibility. Yeah, you'll see the A, confidentiality and integrity never change. They're always the same, but for some reason they do like to change availability, accessibility. Again, just in general, that you can access it easily and when you want to access it. That's the general, whatever word they want to use there. It's in general what it means. So, all right, so this week we're going to be covering the blue team side of that. So next week we'll cover the red team, and then we also have, purple team in the middle, which again is kind of the mix. In reality, in industry, everybody is a little bit purple team. It's hard to be completely full-on red team and never touch anything blue team. Because if you want to be the best red teamer ever, you have to know how blue team is trying to catch you to get around what they're doing. If you want to be the best blue teamer ever, you have to know what red team's attacks are going to look like in order to catch them. So it's kind of, you need to have at least some knowledge of both sides to be good at either. All right, so before we get any farther, we are going to be doing some labs. So this week our lab is going to be a little different. So last week we had basically lecture time, then lab time. This week we're going to do labs intermittently. So with each particular topic, with some topics we won't have labs, but with some topics we will have a short lab to do. And there are some files that you will need. So inside of your Kali VM, so if you have a Kali VM, go to this link and download that within your Kali VM. All you have to do is download it. Don't worry about running the things in there right now. There are some scripts in there that will install some stuff for you. Again, just for now, download the file. How big is it? A couple of gigs?
I know at least my files is like 700 megs or something.
Okay.
So
it's not super big.
It's prohibitively large. Just it can take a little bit to download.
Yeah. So also you will see when you go to that link, and just for everybody, that is https://aub.ie/bootcamp-files. If anybody has any trouble with that, let us know. So you'll see two categories. You'll see malware and forensics, I believe.
Yeah.
So again, download all the files there. You should just be able to download that entire folder preferably. If you want to download each file individually, you can, but yeah, so if anybody has any issues with that, let us know.
Set out some other issue of the USB.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, I'll let Zach or John take care of that. So. Okay, so yeah, once you guys just be working on that, shouldn't take too long, but again, we don't want to impede later on. So, all right, so defensive security, we have a nice keep calm and believe that blue team rocks. I'm all team blue team. I say that I enjoy the red team. It's a lot of fun. Again, to be a good blue teamer, you gotta know red team stuff as well. So, what is blue team? All right, so at a high level, it's a group of people that are looking at systems and they're ensuring security of those systems. Again, that's very high level. So, what are some goals of blue team? So, who can give me some goals that they think a team of defenders against malicious people, what are some goals that they might have? Yep, go ahead. Successfully defend. All right, awesome. Yeah, what you got?
Protect certain files.
Okay. Protect certain files. Yeah, what you got?
Have responses for when people do get in.
Okay, so incident response. Once something happens, how do we respond to it? All right, what you got? Avoid network failures. So whatever service or whatever your company does, it needs to run smoothly. You know, it doesn't. If you're a company that is running websites, your website doesn't need to crash. Okay, all good. Anybody else? All right, so we've kind of tried to consolidate. Again, everything that you guys said is 100% right, and it's hard to consolidate into just a few points what defensive security really is. But we kind of tried to think about it and consolidate best we could. So first off, we have identify targets. That kind of goes both ways. Who is trying to attack us, but also what are they trying to attack? So if we have a website, if people are trying to attack that, how do we secure that? Next, we have restrict access. So what do our access controls look like? Hardened systems. Are we making sure our stuff's updated? Are we, running scripts that script kiddies might run? I mean, you may think, oh, script kiddies, but that's a real thing, Can I go run some script that I find off Google that says it breaks some system, and does my system work fine? Analyze information. So we get an insane amount of information from all these machines. How do we analyze them in a way that, first off, a human can understand? Because there's so much data, it's not reasonable to have one person parse through it all by hand at a larger scale. So how do we analyze that information that we get? And then, like you said, incident response. Once something happens, what do we do? So we're gonna cover each of the 5 of these in a little more detail, and then there's some different subcategories that we're going to get off of these that are going to be kind of the specific topics of defensive security we're going to discuss. All right, so our first thing, identify targets and vulnerabilities within our system. Okay, so just for the most of the entirety of this presentation, I want you to imagine that you are the chief security engineer at a 1,000-employee company. So you're not at a massive company like Google or Apple, but you have people and things that you need to protect, and you need to protect well. You can't just go write some random security stuff and it work. you need to be implementing industry standards that are good and are going to keep your company secure. So, what are some potential vulnerabilities in your system? All of it. What you got?
Social engineering, like phishing.
Social engineering. So people. Yeah, people is probably the number one, honestly. So unfortunately, people is a little bit difficult to train because if you find people they usually are the weakest link. All right, anybody else? What are other vulnerabilities that might be contained within your system? What you got?
Any open network server?
Any open network server. So anything that is openly available to the internet. Anybody else? All right, so I've got a few here that are just things that I thought of off the top of my head. So thinking about what are the most important parts. You said earlier, if we have a particular thing that our company does, if we are all behind something that our website does, then we really have to keep our website up. That is our moneymaker. What is our moneymaker? We have to keep that up. We have to keep that secure. That's what somebody wants to attack. What is important to back up? Are we backing up everything? Are we backing up some things? What level of backup do we have? Are we keeping things for a week, 2 months, 10 years? What extent do we need? Again, what parts need extra security? That kind of goes with the first one. Some things need a little more security than others. What would the attacker want? These are all things that you're thinking about when you're trying to identify those vulnerabilities. What is less important? What do we not care about as much? What is okay if it is not as secure? Maybe you have a entire subnet of stuff that is for, I don't know, malware analysis or something. Okay, well, we probably don't need those boxes to be as secure if they're completely segmented from the network and they're already being used as malicious stuff. Maybe they're not as important. And that takes us into threat intelligence. As we said earlier, who is attacking us? It's important to know and to think about where we're getting attacked from because that helps us think about how to defend against something. And now Zach is going to give us a little bit on threat intelligence.
Yeah, so like Ethan said, when we're thinking about kind of vulnerabilities and what we need to hard, this leads us into the idea of threat intelligence, which is simply like we need to get some knowledge that can allow us to either prevent or mitigate a cyber attack that's happening. And one of the main goals of threat intelligence is to provide context to things that we're seeing and help us make better security decisions based off the information that we have. And we want to answer a few pretty critical questions. So one, who is attacking you? And it may not be you as in our company, but it may be who's attacking our industry, who's attacking companies like us. Like who should we be looking out for? Why? What are their motivations? Is this a financial thing? Do they want to, ransomware make money off of us, or do people have a grudge with our industry or our company? And what are their capabilities? So, like, what can they do? Because some guy in his basement versus a full nation-state actor, it's a big difference in like money, resources, and their capabilities. So it's a big difference in how you prepare for things like that. And along with that, what kind of indicators can we look for? So if we know that someone is targeting our industry or our company, are there any indicators that are associated with them? And this is a term that you'll see very often throughout security, is this idea of an indicator of compromise, or IOC. And so that's some piece of evidence, whether it be network-based, like a URL or an IP address, or host-based, like a file hash or a malicious executable. That itself is, we know, okay, if we see this item, this piece of evidence, that's an indicator that we've been compromised. Like this is associated with a bad guy and something that we need to look into. And so just very briefly, there's kind of different types of threat intelligence we wanted to briefly go over. So the first type is strategic intelligence. This is like very high level, broad overview dealing with like geopolitical conditions of the world, what can we expect? This is intended for high-level decisions and is more for like executives that are not necessarily technical people. And it's, like I said, it's just to give the executives a better overview of what's going on so they can allocate funds as necessary for your cybersecurity and such. Then you have tactical intelligence, which is focusing on the immediate future. So this is things like finding indicators of compromise that might be relevant to you. So there's a lot of places that provide like free and open source data feeds that you can just pull in like IPs and stuff that are associated with known actors. And so you can have that in your, whatever your security system is. So if I see this IP address or this URL or domain, this is associated with this bad guy. So we need to do something about this. Or you might preemptively block those types of things. So if okay, these IP addresses are bad, let's just go ahead and block them, add them to our block list, and none of you have to worry about it. And that's also meant for a technical audience. And tactical intelligence is kind of short term because URL and IP addresses can change. They can always change that, but it's still an important part of it. And then you have operational intelligence. And this is knowledge about cyber attacks, events, or campaigns, or threat actors in general. And so we want to understand different threat actors, different campaigns that are going on. What are their capabilities, their infrastructures, and then there's this term, tactics, techniques, and procedures, which we'll talk about more next week when we do like the red team, the offensive side. But that's essentially like a very technical part of how are they compromising systems. And so this is more of like, we need to understand what these threat actors are capable of, and we can focus on how to harden our system. If we know they're exploiting certain types of things, we can focus on what we think we need to harden and make better security decisions. And that's, again, meant for your technical people. This is meant for your cybersecurity engineers to make their decisions. And where do we use threat intelligence use cases? Well, we use it all over security. So you have incident response, which is where you're actively in an instance. Someone is attacking you right now, or you're looking at an incident that happened. And threat intelligence is really useful, like I mentioned earlier, for adding context. So if I see certain threat tactics and procedures or certain IP addresses or URLs that I know are associated with a threat actor, I can maybe piece together what's happening a little bit faster. Your security operations center or your SOC, when they're identifying, a lot of times they'll have like a giant stream of alerts coming in of things that have been identified in your network. And if they can, piece together, again, more context with the indicators of compromise that they're seeing, they can make more informed decisions on whether or not they need to act on this or not. Vulnerability management that goes along with knowing, what people that are targeting your industry are doing, so you can prioritize what you need to patch, things like that. And lastly, risk analysis, because at companies you develop risk models, and the more information you have, the better you can make your risk model and understand what the risk of your actual company is. So again, that goes along with identifying threat actors targeting your industry and specific vulnerabilities in your environment.
All right. Any questions about that before we move? Before Zach sits down.
Yeah.
About threat intelligence in general. What you got?
For risk analysis, it says development of your response. Do you have like an example, like an industry example of that by any chance, or like any type of experience? Because I kind of understand what that means, but I'm also kind of lost.
Yeah, risk model is kind of an abstract term, and I haven't done as much on because there's a whole different side of cybersecurity. It's like risk models and risk assessment. I'm trying to think of like an easy example. I don't know if you have any.
So I know for certain things you can be. This is more in the government side of stuff, but you can get different levels of, we have complex passwords. Maybe that's level 1. Level 2 is we require multi-factor authentication. So there are different levels of, how secure your system is. And it's arbitrary. It's not guaranteed. But, there are standards that, if they do this, then they are more secure or less secure. And that can kind of fall into risk model a little bit, that maybe you are maybe certain practices you don't do. Again, for example, two-factor authentication. It's taken people a while to really come around to the idea of, hey, we should really use this. And finally, most people are implementing it at this point, but it's been around for, I don't know how many years. Dr. Springall may know how many years two-factor's been around. Decades. It's been around a long time. And there's still companies that don't have it. There's still, Auburn got it in Auburn got Duo since I've been here.
Yeah, which is like last 4 years.
Yeah, in the last 4 years, Auburn got Duo. So people take time to migrate to new things. So even though things may be, yes, this is the most secure, it gets back to trade-offs. Is it worth the time commitment that somebody had to put in to do Duo? They said, well, we don't think that that's a big enough risk to us at this moment. And then maybe they saw another university that had an issue and it would have been mitigated by two-factor. They said, hey, that's interesting. Maybe we need to look at implementing this. Maybe it's worth that trade-off at this point. Yeah, exactly. So
yeah, that's a really good example. Yeah, it's all about like evaluating like what you think is like, because security is kind of all about trade-offs. Like there's trade-offs to making things more secure. Sometimes you sacrifice ease of usability and things like that, but that all goes into your risk model. Like how important is what you need to protect, and what are you willing to trade off to reach that level of security.
And if you don't think something's risky, then you don't implement it. That's just reality. If you think the risk of somebody shooting through your windows is low, then you don't put in bulletproof glass. If you think it's really high, you put in bulletproof glass. That's a somewhat simple and maybe not security applicable, but again, just think about your risks. Some people have different risks than others.
Yeah, so if you know what's going on in your industry, then you might, like we said with the two-factor, if you see other universities getting targeted by something, it might be a good sign that you need to do something different or beef up your security.
All right, Dr. Springall, what's your question?
What happens when the risk is infinite?
Well, that's a fair point. Risk, there's always risk. Again, it's back to the trade-offs, is what risk are you willing to accept and what risk are you trying to mitigate?
Yeah, or what can
some
you
risk
mitigate,
some risk you have to accept, right?
Okay, so put a little more concrete. Somebody at Dropbox has the ability to delete files. There's a risk that person deletes every file at Dropbox.
Yes. Does Dropbox accept that risk? If they accept that risk, then they pay the consequences if something bad happens, right? They're stock tanks because they have no anything now. Hopefully they have backups and whatever, but
Does the product or money-making factor of a company impact risk modeling and risk analysis?
Sure, because sometimes security is expensive. Sometimes people don't want to pay money for security, and so even though maybe you think something's risky, you can't. It's all about the trade-off. Implementing more security features costs more money, so sometimes it may not happen that way. It may not happen how it should.
Does that have a bigger impact when you're outsourcing your security, like when it's not coming from inside your company?
Probably yes. It has impact either way, right? But if you're having to pay somebody else, you're paying somebody else more than if you just had to hire an internal team usually. Not all. Again, it depends if you're paying an outsource full time or part time or whatever. But it varies. It also depends on what you're trying to do. But somebody else had a question. I think you have a question. What you got?
I'm more to touch on the when threats, infinite amount of threats. Is that when you start to get like probability of attacks? Like certain attacks are more likely to happen than when you push your security towards those. Like the chances of if you're like a gaming server way higher because like that's like the main things for kids use, and it's more just like the way people are.
Yeah.
So you probably push more towards that. It's not like
Yeah, that's kind of going on with, like we said, yeah, like for under vulnerability management, like prioritizing patching, like that'd be a priority thing. Like if you're a gaming service and you know you're gonna prioritize having like good anti-cheat, and you're gonna prioritize like DDoS protection. You're like that's the things that affect your service, your product the most. So you'd probably prioritize that more than other things. So yeah.
Yeah, along with accepting risks, you've got to choose which risk. You've got to be able to accept some risks, but the most important ones, you've got to kind of prioritize those and hopefully patch them and fix them where you don't have that risk any longer. So.
And some things are much easier to fix than others. So that factors into it too. Like if some things is as easy as applying a patch, and that's easy to do, but some things are more complicated and you have to think.
If it takes 1 week versus taking 3 years, but maybe the thing that takes 3 years is really important, and the thing that takes 1 week is trivial and doesn't really matter, then what do you do? And there really aren't definite answers to any of to at least for risk modeling. Again, it's whatever the choice of the company is most of the time. Oftentimes there are multiple not wrong decisions. I mean, ideally everything is secure, but that's not realistic. So. All right, any other questions?
These are good questions, though.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Oh, Dr. Springall, one more.
So all this, so threat intelligence is historical. You're looking for indicators of compromise. You're looking at behavior patterns. You're looking at other industry events. Doesn't that defeat the purpose?
What do you mean, doesn't it defeat the purpose?
If you're waiting until a vulnerability is discovered and trying to erase the attacker, aren't you going to lose?
That's a fair point, but I think that I understand what you're saying. I'm trying to let me think about what I want to say.
Okay, think about what I said earlier, and I don't know if you're in the room. If you're a 1,000-employee company, you probably don't have the resources to go find all these You're probably, I mean, you could be a really wealthy 1,000-employee company. You probably don't have the resources to go hire a red team to find all of these vulnerabilities and patch them ahead of time. So you kind of have.
Yeah, and like a lot of it is happening in the past, but a lot of these like threat feeds, you're pulling in data as fast as you can. You're trying to be proactive in the sense that if something's going on in your industry but they haven't hit you yet, you can proactively prepare for that. But I see what you're saying is you would rather just not have that vulnerability to begin with than have to go back and fix it. But I agree with what Ethan's saying. Sometimes it's not as obvious that you have that vulnerability or you don't have the resources to find that in the first place, things like that.
I mean, like, we'll talk later about reverse engineering. And we were discussing, like, do you use reverse engineering other than incident response? And the answer is yes, absolutely you should be, because you should be, trying to reverse engineer your own stuff and see what other red teamers or malicious people could see. But that's not always the case, and it's rather often not the case. Because there's just not always resources to red team yourself or try to break your own stuff. All right, any other questions? All right. So now we're back to the next of our kind of big topics. So restrict access. So what are some things, some questions that we want to think about when we are restricting access? Any ideas on that? What are things we want to restrict access to? I think you said Or maybe you said like open ports and stuff open to the internet, right? So maybe we want to only have the things that we want open to the internet. Yeah, what you got?
Probably like user data, like usernames and passwords.
User data, absolutely. Yeah, who has access to see user information? So can I go to the company page and can I see your username and your password? Hopefully not. Anybody else? What you got? Admin status. So who is an admin, who is not an admin? Anything else? No other questions that you can think about that you don't want everybody to be able to see? Or even your friends. What do you, what do I not want Trip to see? That would be for entirely different reasons, though, probably. That's an interesting answer, but not exactly where I was going. But all right, so first off, we think about firewalls. That's kind of back to what you said about restricting out or traffic coming into our network. Firewalls. That's a basic thing. Does anybody not know what a firewall is? I'm gonna ignore that. But yeah, what kind of and how strict do we want it to be? Should we block a lot of stuff? Should we let a lot of stuff in? Things to think about if you're I don't know, whoever, I guess a network specialist, it would probably be the person dealing with firewalls. But another thing that you often don't think about is, from a security perspective, who has access to stuff? Who has access to buildings? Are there certain labs or rooms that are classified or not accessible to everybody? How do you distribute those keys? That's a whole additional thing. How do you handle VPN? Especially now with remote work, most everybody needs to be able to VPN into, or most employees probably need to be able to VPN into the work network. How do you handle that? Because that's an interesting thing to secure when you send people home with machines that, even though you may have configured the machines and done whatever, now it's at their house. They could pull keys off of it or do all kinds of stuff with it. How do you handle that? Removable media. That's another one that people don't always think about. What's to stop me from taking a USB device that has a keylogger and going and walking by somebody else's desk, sticking it in the back of their computer, and walking off, coming back 2 days later, retrieving my thing, or maybe it even uploads to, something that I have set up, coming back, getting my device, and seeing everything that they've typed for the last 2 days. How do you allow any USBs or anything to be plugged in the machines, or do you validate that, hey, this is a real thing, or does the person who owns that machine have to validate that this is something they want?
How do you validate that it's a real thing?
Yeah, exactly. How do you validate it's a real thing?
Do you plug it into the thing and check?
Yeah. So again, these are just questions that you ask or you might think about. You said somebody said restricting permissions of users. So what can a regular user access? I think it's an interesting point of what can an admin access. Let's be realistic. Admins, although a lot of times they have access to literally everything, should they have access to everything? Well, and then we also have network segregation and segmentation. So that is how can you have different subnets How can they communicate? It's kind of like what machines can reach what machines. And that gets into a little bit that we'll talk a little bit about later about what is normal traffic and what shouldn't be normal traffic. All right, so the next thing we have is hardened systems. So hardening systems, what are some things? I think we already talked about that a little bit, about we want to protect what's important to us, right? So what do we care about? What do we want to harden? How do we harden? The obvious, very easy thing is make sure everything's up to date. That's just a general rule of thumb. If you're running Windows 7, stop running Windows 7. Get up to date. If you haven't patched your Windows machine in 2 months, new vulnerabilities have come out. They've released new patches. Patch your machine. If you're running Linux, make sure you've got all your packages updated. Don't just update certain packages. Because there's some obscure Python library, maybe it had a bug in it or something. And keep things updated. That's just a general rule of thumb across everything, not even at a business level. Just keep things updated. So then, a little bit about what Dr. Springall was talking about a minute ago with threat intelligence, or that we need to test applications for vulnerabilities. Again, that's a little more on the offensive side. Not everybody wants to test their own stuff. If you have a website, run it through some scanners. It doesn't have to be anything like somebody spends a year trying to break into this. It could be short, relatively. But, do some testing. See if there are any obvious vulnerabilities that you forgot to account for. Make sure you don't have some SQL injection in your website. A simple thing that a lot of people don't check for. Well, most people do nowadays. What you got?
Oh, I was going to say, Charlie had a question. He said, what if you can't patch or update? What if you have to run like Windows XP or something?
And that's a valid point. Like a lot of times in government particularly, that is really slow or whatever, you may have applications that only work on certain operating systems, or especially in government, there's no telling what some of those things, they're old and they may only work on XP. That is kind of a difficult situation. You have to, again, update as much as you can, but you can't patch. For example, Eternal Blue is going to exist.
They're going to have you download a volatility thing that only runs on the ancient language of Python 2.
Yeah. Literally, in a little bit, we're gonna have you run something with Python 2, and Dr. Springall is gonna have to leave the room, or else he's gonna explode.
Hospitals are
Yeah, hospitals. That's a great point. That certain things, they're just outdated, and that gets back to the thing that we talked about, trade-offs. Is it worth completely redoing the entire application that you could have spent 2 or 3 years working on? Or do you just live with what it is? I think it is, most banking software is still written in like COBOL. I think it's COBOL. Is that? Yeah, you're shaking your head. So it's like COBOL. Who has used COBOL? Anybody in here used COBOL ever? Okay, Dr. Springall has. Again, very old. Not saying that it's a bad language. Oh, okay, it's a bad language.
No, I'm just agreeing with you. It's the other thing about hospitals. You might not be able to update all those little EKG machines.
Yeah.
Well, as soon as they EOL XP, are they just going to not use an EKG machine until 3 years later when one gets certified?
Yeah, and even if you think about like Dr. Springall's example, you also have military stuff. If you've got to have stuff that is fully operational at all times, and it can't go down for any reason, how do you update that? How do you change operating systems? How do you rewrite that application? Hospitals, again, great example. Sometimes it's tough to deal with that, and unfortunately, that's what it turns into is mitigating best you can and hoping that nothing too bad happens. I don't know that there is a good way to go about, at least not that I know of, about how do I secure a Windows XP system. It's going to be insecure. Now, I can run secure stuff on it, right? Maybe. Hopefully the applications are secure, maybe.
Take it offline.
Take it offline. I can...
Wire or air gap it.
Yeah, I can try to ensure that it's as secure as possible, but insecurities are still going to exist. So that's just kind of an unfortunate thing that is a reality in a lot of industry. Or at least that's my experience. My experience is mostly on the government side of stuff. But I haven't dealt with hospital EKG machines.
I was just using EKGs.
But I mean, it's a valid point. Like,
But there are a bunch of that type of stuff because of the certification.
yeah, and even if you have an application, if it has to go through years of certification to make sure that it is up to the standard, because stuff like that, legitimately, if something bad happens, somebody could lose their life. I mean, that's serious. Are you willing to take that risk? Right? All right, so back to hardening systems. So a few things for like testing applications. You can use some commercial products. You can use, if you don't want to full-on red team it yourself, you can full-on red team it yourself, but that's a lot of work, and a lot of companies aren't going to want to do that. You could also just pay somebody else to do it. You can create your own or attempt to create your own. Also, think about what applications you're testing. If you get a commercial off-the-shelf or COTS product, are you checking that for vulnerabilities? It's kind of you're checking your applications to check your applications for vulnerabilities. I mean,
Turtles all the way down.
yeah. So, just another thing, which this kind of gets back to, somebody mentioned it earlier about people. The people are the weakest link. Hardening systems also means people. Can we do awareness training? Make them think about phishing, social engineering, all of that type of stuff. Configuration management. Is everything configured appropriately? All right, so now Trip is going to talk about cryptography a little bit. So we've talked about kind of how you harden systems. Do what?
Very little.
Yeah, very little. Harden systems, and part of that is cryptography or restricting access. Cryptography is usually involved in that. It's kind of neither offensive nor defensive.
Yeah.
It kind of fits in the middle that it's a little bit of both.
It's a tool in the toolkit, I guess.
Yes, but we wanted to talk a little bit about cryptography, so
Yeah.
so we just kind of
Alright.
tossed it in around here, and hopefully you guys will enjoy that.
Yeah. And I'm just gonna be.
Also, the microphone's right here.
Oh.
No, it's this one.
Okay.
So just
Alright.
just stay relatively near that. Yeah, it's
Occlude the front-facing camera over there then. Yeah. So this is gonna be pretty high level, hit the bullet points type stuff. I think in a couple weeks we're gonna do some more in-depth example problems in cryptography or something. That'd be kind of fun. But yeah, what is cryptography, or the one true crypto for short, not cryptocurrencies, anything like that. Cryptography is this massive field within security and privacy itself that has all sorts of different areas. There's the systems world cryptography, where it's actually implementing ciphers and stuff on actual hardware, trying to figure out how to best work with fixed register sizes and the operations that a computer can do to try and improve things and optimize for both security and speed and everything else. But yeah, there's like classical cryptography, which is sort of the old school cryptography that I know really nothing about, but it's the ancient Egyptians used it up until World War II, basically. That sort of massive time scale, which is all the pre-computer age. Nowadays, cryptography is just sort of changed completely into this thing of we're not trying to like hide things from people that can work things out with pen and pencil. We're trying to like make things computationally hard to. We're trying to hide information so that it's computationally hard to recover, make it unalterable across the hostile internet, that sort of thing. Yeah. So it's this whole huge field, and it has tons of applications. It's a pretty big part of everyone's life nowadays. Everyone makes use of it anytime you pretty much touch a computer. By far the most common applications are like TLS is what HTTPS uses anytime you browse any modern web page that's configured well. The security and privacy community has done a really good job of getting websites to adopt HTTPS, so that's nice. Wi-Fi protected access, or maybe wireless protected access, WPA. Whenever you hop on Wi-Fi, you're using some crypto system to actually transmit information between you and an access point, and that's sort of the nature of any sort of wireless communications being out in the open like they are, just broadcasting signals into the air. You do kind of want to ensure both the secrecy of what you're sending and that you're actually talking to who you think you are. That comes up a good bit with like mobile phones and stuff, but yeah. So how does it work? That's a very deep question. You can go quite far with that. So when everyone thinks of cryptography, they think of the two main operations. They think of encryption, which is just taking some input plain text using some unknown value, your key, and transforming that plain text into something that's unreadable by an adversary. Whereas decryption is the just inverse of that, for symmetric cryptography, using the same key to go back to the original plain text. But yeah, the idea is just essentially using that hidden key to provide all of the secrecy, all of the integrity, if that's what you're going for. But yeah, basically making bits look like random garbage on the wire, sort of. So yeah, there's two sort of, when it comes to encryption and decryption, there's two sort of modern approaches to it, and they both have their different use cases. There's the one that everyone thinks about, or the most obvious one being symmetric key cryptography. You use the same key, or that typically means you use the same key to encrypt that you do to decrypt. So you take in a block of plain text, use the key, then use that same key to recover the plain text back. And then there's public key cryptography or asymmetric cryptography, and that's really came about in the 70s with Diffie-Hellman and RSA, and that kind of opened the world up to a broad new realm of possibilities as far as what all you could accomplish. That's when the ideas of digital currencies and stuff came about, because you could actually do these sort of authentication proofs out in the open using a public key that's known to everybody and a corresponding private key that's kept secret. Yeah, and that's very useful for just knowing who you're talking to on the other end is actually who they say they are, and that sort of thing. And that's something we'll be looking at in a couple of weeks. And there's a couple of classic symmetric ciphers are just the substitution cipher, which is swapping characters or bytes, if you want to call it, or yeah, if you want to consider it bytes. It's taking each character and swapping it according to some known substitution, where in this case the substitution is the key. And then transposition ciphers are swapping things around, and you can sort of combine these two operations to make like substitution permutation ciphers, which are the building blocks of most modern day block ciphers. So that's, yeah, something we'll look at. Algorithms, well, no, shouldn't say that. Everyone has used AES. It's by far the most common encryption algorithm. At least in the US, or at least for most applications, TLS and stuff default to using AES, which is the successor to DES, the data encryption standard, which came out of like the NSA and stuff in the 70s, 80s maybe. It was a crypto system that was thought to be secure at the time because it used 56-bit keys, and everyone was like, 56 bits, how are you ever going to break that? Yeah. These days, that's just not too hard to even like brute force. I mean, it's still hard. You need a good bit of computation to do it, but easy enough that like someone with a good bit of resources can do it. Definitely, someone with a lot of money and EC2 instances can pull off. So, yeah, people moved away from DES pretty quickly over time as the world sort of realized the explosive growth of computation. And I'll talk about some other stuff later, but there's another thing called cryptanalysis. It's just the breaking of ciphers, breaking of codes. It's mostly using like probabilistic measures, since kind of the goal of modern cryptography is to make plain text look indistinguishable from random. That's kind of how you get provable security these days. Then the way that you break cryptography is actually distinguishing it from random, so that you can imagine a good bit of like statistics comes into that. And there's all sorts of different theoretical models on cryptographic attacks, the type of adversaries that you're going up against, and what are their capabilities. What sort of information do they have access to, like known plain text pairs and their corresponding ciphertext. Yeah, there's most of the modern ciphers that we use these days stand up pretty well to like AES. Since everyone uses it, it has to stand up pretty well to like known plain text ciphertext attacks, because if it didn't, we'd all be kind of in a bit of a pickle. But yeah, so that's some cryptography stuff, and I'll hand it back to Ethan for.
All right. So our next kind of big overarching topic is analyzing information. So every single system, networks, all of that has information. There is a lot of information too. So we're gonna talk about two specific components of this in just a second, and that is networks and network analysis and then system analysis. So what are some things that are relevant to analyzing information? If we're thinking about, hey, we need to have this massive amount of data, what do we do with it? So first we collect it. If it's on the machines, we have to have a way to get it off and get it to a somewhat centralized location. It's hard to, if I want to look at all of your machines and look at your logs, it's not very beneficial for me to go to Lauren and look at her machine, and then go to the next person, go to Vicky, look at her machine, Enoch. It's not very efficient to go to each one individually. But if I can mass collect all of those at a centralized location, look through all of them together, that's a lot easier. You can also start to see patterns. You can do all kinds of things like getting rid of unnecessary data or irrelevant security data. So, what you got, Trip?
What happens when the software that I installed to collect information comes back and bites me?
Well, I assume that's like a
Thinking of a very particular.
yeah. Well, so
High-profile incident.
there's a level of trust that occurs with certain companies. For example, if you trust Google Chrome, you trust Firefox. Okay, well, maybe 100% not Google Chrome. You trust whatever browser you use. You trust in general, though, right? Whether you want to trust it fully or not, you use it. You are trusting it by using it somewhat. So, I mean, we're trusting companies with software all the time. Every time we download, like in just a minute when we run Wireshark, we're trusting that Wireshark is not malicious. Should we trust that? Maybe, maybe not. But we do. So there's a level of trust that exists with anything. If they get compromised, we potentially pay some price. Although we hope that we're not government and don't really matter about all of our secure things, but we're secrets. So yeah, we have EDR detection. So that's endpoint detection and response. So that is software typically that is installed on an endpoint, and it's going to collect it and also going to allow some response. You also have intrusion detection system. So we'll talk a little bit more about that kind of in a second. That's going to be maybe looking at signatures. So we'll talk about signatures in a second. What are we looking at, and how can we know that something might be bad? What are signs that we have been that something malicious is going on? And the security information and event manager, or SIEM. So that is your where everything is aggregating in that centralized location. So once we have all this information collected, we want to analyze and correlate that information. So we want to match everything together. I want to know what machine it's associated with, because if I have John's logs, I don't want to think they're somebody else's. I want to know whose they are. I want to know timing. I want to have a good timeline set up. All of that is important. So how do we analyze and correlate? Network activity. Again, making sure that this domain name resolution did come from this IP, and it came from John's machine. Knowing that is important. And it's also nice to know that it's not necessarily necessary, but it does make things easier if I can say it's John's machine, not its IP 192.168.0.15. I can find out that's John's machine, but it's also nice, especially if you have like DHCP and stuff, would be nice. So, Windows events. Who knows what Windows events are? Anybody? What you got?
You mean like the event log?
Yep.
Alright, then it's pretty much just anything that you have auditing, they'll record down what you're doing as a user.
Yep.
Basically log it, you can see what a user has been up to.
Exactly. So it's going to look at almost anything you do on Windows has some form of event. I think there's 10,000 events, roughly, give or take 1,000 or two, probably. There's all kinds of events. If you log on to your machine, that's an event. If you fail a log on, that's an event. And then within each event, there's sub events or types. So, for example, log on, which is a 4624. A Windows event is 4624 is somebody logged into the machine. There are a few different types. There is I'm at a computer, I logged in. There is I accessed it through RDP or remotely. There's also I think type 1 is you have certain things that may log into your machine that are, like, for example, Linux does a lot of, like, if you look at all your users in Linux, you see a bunch of users that you never touch. They have like a no login, that type of thing. I think top one on 4624 is something like that. I'm not 100% sure, but I haven't looked at that particular event in a long time. So, EDR, IDS events. So those events that are coming in, can we look at those and analyze those, see what they look like? Access. Yes, how people logged in. You can even throw in like door access. That type of stuff might be relevant. Although probably wouldn't throw that in the same grouping, but still relevant to analyze potentially. If somebody shows up or swipes in at midnight, that might be a little weird, unless you're Dr. Springall. Then completely normal. System operations. What is normal? Is everything working correctly? Are all your machines, or is their status on their services good? Or, are they throwing errors or things like that? So another way we could analyze information is through machine learning. So that is, if anybody has ever done any like artificial intelligence type stuff? A little bit. So machine learning is kind of this big idea that we let a artificial intelligence, an AI, a machine go in and try to find anomalies in data, basically. It's reasonably good. At times they're not going to find everything. And if anything, they just alert and say, hey, this might be anomalous. Tell a real person to go look at it. So they can assist with analysis, just make things easier. Visualizations is a huge thing, makes it way easier on a human to be able to see and understand data. As we'll see in just a second, it's really difficult to parse through millions of lines of data by yourself. So that's an example of a visualization. So I don't think, you can't quite see it, but like that 25 is total events, 2 is failed logins. So, we have 2 failed logins. That's interesting. And then the 0 is deleting stuff. So, all right, so let's talk about network analysis specifically. So we're monitoring, analyzing network traffic, and then we're trying to prevent and identify malicious activity. This is also relevant to incident response, which we're going to talk about later, and John will talk about a little bit. All right, so we want to identify anomalous behavior. We want to make sure we have good network management configuration. It's going to play an incident response. We also need to identify the weak spots in our network. That gets back to knowing what we want to secure and what we don't care about being insecure. Network analysis. how is our network configured? What is abnormal activity for our network? It also means what is normal activity for our network? What parts of our network need to be monitored more closely? What parts don't need to be monitored as close? What is the most vulnerable part? Contrary of that, what is the least vulnerable part? You'll notice that pretty much each of these questions have two sides. That if I want to think about the most vulnerable, I also need to think about the least vulnerable. Do we try to fix the vulnerable parts? What machines are talking to each other? Should those machines be talking to each other? What machines should be getting traffic? You might have heard of a honeypot. A honeypot is essentially something that should never be touched. And if it gets touched, oh, that's a red flag. And are there any interesting connections, which I would say that kind of falls underneath. And that's just kind of a basic idea of how a network capture works. That you're sniffing the packets. It's called a sniffer. And then you're going to push it through different rules and whatever to eliminate useless information and also to look for signatures or particular things of interest. Again, typically you're going to find those from somebody else. But all right, so, oh yeah, I forgot I have this. So if you want to analyze some malware traffic, that is real malware, you can go to that website and you can actually check out real PCAPs that have malware running. It's interesting. You can download those, check those out. Again, that's just if you're interested. All right, so we finally have a lab. It took a little bit longer to get here than I really thought it would. I didn't think it was this many slides in, but you know, most of the rest of the stuff will have little labs, so hopefully that'll make it a little less lecture heavy, because I know you guys are probably getting tired of hearing our voices. All right, so on your Kali machine, Wireshark should already be installed. So I want you to let me pull up my Wireshark. All right, so we're going to pull up Wireshark. So you should just be able to search Wireshark. You're also welcome to download it on your host machine if you want to. This is I have it on my host. So what Wireshark does is it captures network traffic, and it generates a PCAP file. So we're just going to kind of very simply capture a little bit of traffic. Everybody can do this on your own machine. This is kind of a live demo, but you can do it as well. We're going to capture a little bit of traffic and take a brief look at it. Again, just to give you an idea of how much data we're dealing with. All right. Anybody have any questions with that? Everybody good on that? Does everybody have their VM ready to go and Wireshark ready? Wireshark. Yeah, you can download it on your host machine if you need to. What you got?
Yeah, I don't have anything downloaded on my laptop.
You want to give him a MacBook? And if you need a MacBook, whatever your name is in the yellow shirt, if you want a MacBook that has stuff already installed, you're welcome to use that as well.
What we really need is I can run upstairs and get my adapter promiscuous mode.
I mean,
Oh wait, we're doing monitor mode?
Yeah.
yeah, I was intentionally avoiding that for now.
I left mine.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and kind of run this and just let you guys see. So I'm going to click on Wi-Fi here and let this one run. Again, I've got a bunch of adapters. Just ignore those. All right, so now we have a Wireshark capture running. So I'm going to go to Google. We're going to go to AUEHC's website.
I'm going to put the link for stealmylogin.com.
So we've got here, we can go to About. We can go to Posts. We can bounce around. All right, now let's go back to Wireshark and let's go ahead and stop that. And as you can see in that little amount of time, if you see this bar on the right, we already have a whole lot of data. A whole lot of data. And that was, what, 15 seconds on one machine? So you think about 1,000 machines for days. Think about how much data that's going to be. So, any ideas on how we, let's say we want to get the name ehc.auburn.edu that I went to. Any ideas on how to look for that? This isn't really like a Wireshark tutorial, just again to get you guys a little bit familiar and thinking about the scope of stuff. So I'm just going to go up to the top here and I'm going to do DNS. So DNS is domain name system. So it's going to show all of the IP addresses or hosts that were resolved. And if we look here, we see we have ehc.auburn.edu. And we have the github.io on the back end of our website. We have Google. You know, we have some different, somewhat random stuff that is associated with the web pages. So, I mean, you can parse through this reasonably at times, but it's also useful to have something that gets rid of either unnecessary information or has a good way to parse through all of this data rather than just looking at literally this massive. Because it would take me a while. I mean, like, well, I guess actually. Oh no, let me scroll to the top. So it would take me a while just scrolling down through here to look for AUEHC.auburn.edu. Could I find it in this one? Absolutely. No, that's not it. It goes right here somewhere. Okay, maybe it's not. Okay. Oh, there it was. Yeah, it is right there. Again, we were able to find it, but it's a lot easier. So that's why having tools and extra things to parse through this, and also having things that check for maybe you have a particular malware that you know it always reaches out to this specific internet address. Maybe it always reaches out to thisismymalware.com. And I see, oh, I had a system reach out to that website or that URL. That's a flag of, hey, maybe this is something bad's happening. There is a lot of work that goes into finding signatures, which a signature is something to detect something malicious, like a specific way that's really fast and easy to detect something malicious. Lots of those exist, and those could be rolled into some network analysis stuff.
I had no idea Google was so quick at these days. Or that Chrome was almost not quick.
Yeah. I didn't know that either until last night, and I was playing around with this. So.
It's really
Also, what you got?
So on Wireshark, with all the different lines, like mine are like I have some red, some blue, some green.
Yeah, you can color code them if you want to.
My question, like, what do those represent? What does it mean?
Usually, a lot of times they represent different protocols, right?
Yeah, like green is normally HTTP and all. Like I know that's all normally green.
black. I think I see a lot as like TCP retransmissions or errors.
Yeah, black is usually not like it was an issue. Oh, and this represents like packets and stuff that are passed along the wire. Again, we may get into that at a future point a little more in detail. But it was just something, kind of interesting to show off. Like, hey, here's Wireshark, here's network stuff. You can play around with that and look at that more if you want to.
In the Discord, Charlie put an article that's got all the different colors and what they mean.
Okay.
You can change them.
Yeah. All right, so next we're going to go to system analysis, and this one will also have labs. We'll get to do even more stuff. So system analysis, honestly, is really similar to network analysis. It's just doing the same stuff, but on systems. So what are our goals? We're identifying anomalous behavior, same as previously. We want to identify if a system has been compromised. We want to log data for future incident response. We want to catch malicious activity early before attackers have time to pivot, and that's going to help IR if we can isolate a host and make sure attackers can't do anything else to other machines. All right, system analysis. So, what is happening on each system? Very important. We need to know who is logged in, what processes are running, what files are being touched, all of that information. We're going to see that in system logs, Windows events, registry modifications, processes being run, files on the machine. It's also really important if you're is anybody not familiar with what domain is? So,
Not really.
oh, do what?
Windows domain stuff. I don't actually know why they do their own domain system.
Oh,
What's the purpose?
so, well, yeah, that's a great question. But in general, domain, Active Directory, all the Windows hierarchical stuff, it's basically a form of access control, and you have an admin, and then you have a bunch of people that are not admins, and the admin can make changes to everybody below. It's a very basic kind of, that's...
So they use domains specifically because they can like piggyback off of the existing domain system.
Yeah, so I know I can go to trip.desktop or yeah, whatever. I can go somewhere. I can access your. I can do stuff to your machine, and I have privileges and all of that. So Windows domain, Active Directory, all of that is kind of hierarchical, but it's relevant because there are like policies and which I guess I can click, but account modifications, those things are important because if somebody has escalated privileges all of a sudden, or they try to request escalated privileges, red flags. What are administrator accounts doing? If they're doing something that the administrator is not actually doing, that's interesting. And then policy changes. And then the last thing I wanted to say, and I mentioned it several times, is what are signatures? So signatures, I said it earlier, but I just wanted to say it again, that it is something we can use to detect that something malicious is happening. So maybe a particular malware modifies a certain registry key. Maybe it spawns a particular process. Maybe it decides to spawn a process called calc.exe, or good old calc.exe, which you'll see that in a second. But we're looking for things that we can obviously pick up and say, yes, that is malicious. And usually we're going to be using previously known signatures. You can come up with your own signatures, but that's more work. All right, so for system analysis, for our quick lab here, so we're going to look at our system log information. So if you are on Mac OS or Linux, you can, if you cd into var log, so I'll go there. Marty here. Awesome. No, I know I said update everything, but we'll wait a little bit longer. All right, so I'm in varlog. You can see I have all these different things. So knowing exactly what to do or what logs are relevant is a whole nother thing. It's important to know what logs are relevant, but there's also a lot of irrelevant logs. So we'll look at syslog real quick. So as we can see, it really looks like a bunch of garbage, but there is relevant information here. We can see subnet stuff. all this DHCP, network manager stuff. Again, may look like nothing, but there is some relevant information here. We could also check out, I think it is, could go into apps, we could look at history. I can
Why does the app?
do what?
Never mind.
So as you can see, I installed Wireshark earlier today. So you can see all kinds of log information. Again, some of it's relevant, some of it's not, and all of it has to be parsed to a little bit better understanding. If you are on Windows, you can go to Event Viewer. So if you just click down here in this bottom left and type Event Viewer, you have this nice thing. So this is where you're going to look at your Windows events. So I mean, we can see all kinds of things already down here. So let's look at particularly security. So we can see when I logged on, so 4624, what I was talking about earlier. User account management, special logon, system integrity. There are lots and lots down through here. A lot of these seem to be user account management. A lot of logons. System integrity. Log off. Other system events. Not a ton of variety, but again, all of that is relevant. All of it needs to be parsed. All of it needs to be put into something so that somebody can analyze that and be able to view it. Because some of that, in this case, all of it's good information. But what happens if I see 1,000 failed logon attempts to somebody's computer? It's probably not a good thing. And again, all of this is fine looking because there's nothing bad happening. But if you see, oh, you know, this process was just ran and it's never been run before, or maybe that's an interesting thing, or this process spawned another process, things like that. This file shouldn't ever be modified, and it was modified. You should never, like kernel 32 DLL was modified. Why was that modified? So that's just, again, system analysis, very important. And you get a lot of information between network and system analysis. Parsing it is the tough part. And finding the relevant information is there, but finding the relevant information is sometimes tough as well. Because again, it's easy to get overwhelmed by the sheer amount of stuff. So, alright, I think, are we on to the next? Nope, scroll down. Oh yeah, I got one more slide. Come on, go here.
Yeah, it's just incident response. You don't have any incident response.
Yeah, no, of course not. Alright, so incident response, which Zach and John are going to do shortly. So what are some of our goals? We want to contain the breach. We want to figure out the extent of the breach. Eradicate any persistence. So if the adversary is still there, we want to get rid of them. We want to recover all the data. So if they took data, if they encrypted data, whatever, we want to try and get that back. We want to trace back the origin of the incident so we can hope to mitigate it later. And then we want to fix that vulnerability, hopefully. So a few subcategories that Zach and John are going to talk about: reverse engineering, malware analysis, digital forensics. And that's just kind of a general graph of what exactly you're going to be doing in incident response. You're going to have some preparation. Then once it's actually once an incident occurs, you're going to have to identify, contain, eradicate, recover, and then move forward and start preparing again, basically. It's just a continuous cycle. All right, so reverse engineering. There are two kind of categories of reverse engineering. There's software reverse engineering, so that is if you ever write any application and you write it in C++. You look at the C++, Zach gives me his code, his C++ code. I tell you what it does, or I tell him what it does. That's software reverse engineering. Binary reverse engineering is C++ has been compiled. It's been taken all the way down to a binary file, and we are able to get the assembly back. We're not able to get a source code, original source code. We're able to get assembly level stuff back. So that is what we're going to discuss I think in a month or two. We're going to have a guest speaker from Sandia National Labs. And he's going to talk about some binary reverse engineering. So where is it used? It's used malware analysis, binary exploitation, so actually figuring out how to break stuff. Malware analysis is more, hey, malware's here, we need to figure out what it's doing in order to get it off, in order to find signatures like I was talking about earlier. Also figuring out legacy code support and just in general an incident response. And now Zach is going to do malware analysis. So do you want to plug your laptop in?
I'll just do the slides first.
Okay.
Okay, so first of all, what is malware? So that's simply any software that does something bad. It's intentionally causing harm or detriment to the user, the computer, or the network. And we have this process of malware analysis. That's where we dissect malware to understand how it works, how we can identify it in the future, and how we can remove it or eliminate it off of a system. So a big thing here before we go into this is do not perform malware analysis on your host system. Use a virtual machine because some of the malware we're going to talk about later on can be very nasty, and you do not want to have that or execute on your host machine. So please use your Kali VM for all that so you're safe. We have our little meme in the corner here about the calculator app. You know, if you ever see your calculator app pop up and ask to use your camera, you know you probably got some malware. So there's a few different types of malware. I just want to briefly go over some of these kind of keywords. You have a backdoor, which is basically any malicious code to allow the attacker access back into your system with like little or no authentication. You have a botnet, and this is where a bunch of computers are infected, and they're all controlled by like one single command and control server. So like you may have heard of like DDoS, distributed denial of service attacks. That's often done with a botnet, where they have just a bunch of computers slamming a network. You have spyware, which is essentially spying on the user, collecting information about the user and sending that to an attacker server. A rootkit that's designed to conceal the existence of other code. So it's like normally operating on the kernel level instead of like the user level, so it's harder to detect. You have scareware, which is designed to frighten users. So if you see something pop up like, if you don't, pay us to remove this virus in 7 days, your computer's going to explode, or something ridiculous like that. It's designed to like scare the end user into doing something. Or like, if you don't pay this bill, you're going to jail. Like, we're going to come arrest you. Like, that's scareware. Ransomware is designed to block access to computer until some sort of ransom or money is paid. So, that's pretty popular these days, where all your files get encrypted and they're send me so much Bitcoin and I'll give you the key to decrypt. That's ransomware. You have adware, which is just if you ever get like spammed with advertisements on your computer, that's all adware. Then you have like these three kind of categories of malware, like broader categories of malware. The worm, Trojan, and virus. So a worm is self-replicating in the sense that it doesn't need to be attached to a host program. A Trojan is some malicious program designed to appear as a legitimate program, or it might even retain the functionality of a legitimate program, but it could have a malicious part to it. And finally, a virus is another piece of malware that can replicate, but it's attached to a host program, so you have to actually click a file, whereas a worm can propagate through a network without actually being attached to a certain file. So there's two different types of malware analysis. You have static and dynamic. And so static is just looking at your binary or whatever code you have without actually executing it. And you'd be surprised how much you can infer about what a program or executable may do just by looking at some static analysis thing. That's what we're going to do in the lab in just a few minutes. But you can look at the strings, like any type of like plain text within the program can give you some hints of what it does. Additionally, we can look at what function calls it's using for Windows. Like, oftentimes the Windows function names are very descriptive of what they do. So if you see it using a function called write file, well, I can probably infer that this malware is writing some file. And so what I've just been describing is more basic static analysis. So this is just kind of looking at different aspects and properties of the executable. But then you can actually disassemble a binary into assembly code and look at it in a tool like IDA or Ghidra, and that's more of advanced static analysis, and that requires you to understand the assembly language and how that works. And that's more of what we're going to get into later when we do the reverse engineering. If we're going to have like a boot camp on x86 assembly, kind of get you guys refreshed on that, and we can go into like your advanced static analysis. Then you have dynamic analysis, and this is basically let's run the malware and see what happens. And so you definitely want to do that in a sandbox in a VM. You don't want to do that in your host system. You can use tools like iNetSim or Wireshark to capture network traffic. You can look at registry keys as editing and so on and so on. So that's like the basic form of dynamic analysis is just executing it and just looking at what happens. And then you can get to an advanced dynamic analysis where you start debugging. You start pausing the program in the middle of its execution and looking at registers and stuff like that. That's something, again, that a little more complicated, and we'll get into that later on when we do like a full lecture on like reverse engineering. So some cool resources if you're into like malware analysis or you want to learn more about it. Here's some books you can check out, especially practical malware analysis. It's like the holy grail of malware analysis books, and it's like a really easy read. Also, we actually do have a reverse engineering course at Auburn, so if you're really interested, there's a class you can take. I think it accounts for electives for a lot of like computer science and stuff. I think you can take it as an elective. I don't know if it's just grad students or not, but that's a really cool thing you can do if you're interested as well. And now we want to do a little taste of some basic static analysis in the form of a malware analysis lab. So if you guys want to do this along with me, which I suggest you do because it's kind of cool. So if you go to the Bootcamp files link, there's a folder called malware analysis, and in it there's two things. There's a script for Linux to install the tool we're going to use called PEBear, and then there's the binary we're going to actually analyze that's in a 7-zip, and you just need to unzip that. So I'll give you guys a few minutes to do that. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you absolutely don't have like a Linux environment to work with, you can install PEBear on Windows, but I don't encourage people to do this type of stuff on their host machine. We're just doing static, like we're not actually executing anything, but just to be safe, I definitely encourage you to do this in a virtual machine.
In general, do not run malware. It's a bad idea.
So yeah, so just, I'll give you, like I said, I'm gonna give you guys a minute or two to like install all this. It shouldn't take long at all, and feel free to ask questions. Right now, I'm gonna swap machines real quick. So any questions so far in this setup? So everybody doing okay? It threw a bunch of errors. Ethan, do you see what the errors is?
Matthew said you're doing something.
Oh, yes. battery we have some chargers.
Oh, it doesn't have it.
I would recommend getting a virtual machine so you can do stuff on your computer. Virtual, I think it's worth it. That way you don't have to be here. You can do stuff on your we have some write-ups. I can link that to your. We have some before but I would just use the Mac. All right, appreciate it. Yeah, no problem. Yes, you're ready to open it. So yeah, that's good to go. Is that where you should be at? Yeah, so like the last command here, the PE tac bear ampersand, that opens it up and it runs the process in the background. So that should actually open the PE bear window. It should be waiting for you to put in a file.
I'm sure. I don't know what the heck I'm doing.
Okay, yeah, sure, can probably help you real quick.
So you're on the. Yeah, I'm just.
That's not creepy.
Not sure how Ellie's file address.
There we
go.
So yeah.
Type of PWD, that's the program to print your current home directory. That'll tell you where you're at. So you're in your home directory now. The way the file system's laid out is good. Like each user has their own directory. That's what we're sure. Like it's analogous to like.
Is there a question? You guys good? Yeah.
So you should have their desktop folders. So try CD to change directory to capital V desktop. Sorry, did you run
So,
now you're on the
X out of X, yeah. You're good. Like, or you're at okay. So you can run the script and all that? Okay, yeah, so you don't want to run the executable. We're going to actually analyze that. So you want to run the script tool and then we'll open the executable in the tool.
Where do I just need to use that file?
So that's your command prompt. So yeah, first you have to download the file.
And so,
Okay,
just
so
the one that I was doing is, when would I use that versus just CD?
Command prompt.
Or where you were just typing the directory.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the script.
So the way that terminal work, or the way that like shells work on Unix stuff, they're like this.
Do I need to put quotations around that?
Yes, because it has the spaces, or you can backslash escape the spaces. You can't go into the folder there. Quotations will work as well.
No problem.
Okay. So the way it works is that it expects a sort of shortcutting over this. So
Yeah, like I love that.
shortcutting type with it. And then after that, it can be the CD is a command that changes your current directory into the other directory.
No problem. Yeah,
It just gives it the executable. Non-access. Oh, maybe it needs to be extracted.
Yeah, okay.
Get out a quote, type LS and see what you're dealing with.
Do a control C.
Oh, probably need a CD.
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
So here, what I'm going to do is for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and do this, and then we'll have the video. So if you want to go back later and do it on your own, you can follow along with the YouTube video. So for those of you who have got it going,
So then you can run the script like the same way that you do it by typing / so that they get
so for those of you who have got it going, you should have. Let me run PE Bear real quick.
install as you start typing then you can press tab for it to happen. That's what happened last time.
You should have a PE Bear window looks like this, right? And so if you click File, Load PE, then you should click that executable that you unzipped earlier. And so that's going to actually unzip, or not actually unzip, but it's going to load that PE into PE Bear. And there's a lot going on here. And you can do a lot of stuff with PE Bear, but I don't want to keep you guys late. So we have these tabs here, right? So we have like this disassemble.txt, some generals, and these tabs give us some general information about the executable. So if we go to things like, let's see, the file header, we can see, okay, this file was created Friday, August 30th, 2019. If we go into the optional header, we can see things like this has Windows GUI, which means this is like a graphical. This AUEHC has like a graphical interface, things like that. But the main thing I wanted to kind of show off in this is look at these imports within the executable. So these DLLs are like libraries that the executable is using, and there's certain functions within these libraries that it's using that can tell us a lot about what the malware does without even actually having to run it. So if you look here, if you click on kernel32.dll, if you click kernel32.dll while you're under this imports, you can see the imports in this little table below. And if you'll notice, we have things that kind of are intuitive to us that you can read the function name and guess what it does. We have things like winexec that executes something. We have write file, create file. All of those tell us that, okay, this malware could possibly be executing something. It could possibly, create or write a file. We have things like move file, get temp path. That's getting like the temp directory of Windows. So like maybe they're writing something in the temp directory. We don't know. So things like that. We also have this load resource, which is another big indicator. It's kind of a more complicated topic, and we'll talk about that more during the malware or reverse engineering block. But yeah, this is one of the things I just wanted to really quickly show you, that just by looking at the functions of the malware, we can easily start to get an idea of its capabilities. We don't know exactly what it does yet because we haven't ran it, but we make some guesses, some possibilities that we can later test with dynamic analysis when we actually execute it. We know kind of what to look for. We're narrowing down our search for what this malware does. And so there is a bunch of stuff you can do in PE Bear. It's a super cool tool. Feel free to play around with this. The actual executable that I'm using is from the Practical Malware Analysis book. So if you're interested in this, you want to do some more stuff, they have a bunch of free labs, and you can do that here. Another really cool, easy thing you can do for stack analysis is run this program called Strings on it. And so what Strings does is it looks for ASCII printable characters. So text. It's looking for plain text within this executable, and that can give us an idea of some stuff it's doing. So if you go to the directory that you have this lab4.exe installed in, the command is just Strings. It's pre-installed on Kali, so you don't have to install anything. But if you just run that on the executable, we can see a bunch of these plain text strings. Let me make it a little bigger here, and some of them give us some insight. So we see all the function names that we saw a second ago in PE Bear, but we also see some additional stuff. We see some executable names, like this winup.exe. We see this system32 winupdatemanager.exe. We see some DLLs that weren't referenced before. We see another header for an executable. So that's kind of weird why there are two two of these, like this program cannot be run in DOS mode. We see one up here and another one down there. That's strange. We see a URL, like that's big. Like we know, okay, there's a good possibility that this malware in some way has network connectivity and goes out to this URL. So things like that are just, you can infer a lot of what the malware's capabilities are just by doing some basic static analysis. And this is just to kind of give you guys just a very small taste of what you can do with malware analysis. And like I said, we're going to go much more in depth with that later on. But are there any questions about PE Bear or strings or anything we just did? Yeah.
What does this malware do?
So this particular one, I haven't actually ran this in a while, but I believe it's doing something like it's copying an executable to your System32, and it's the executable. It has this malware has what's called the resource section. So it has a second executable load in its resource section. So it's actually carving out a second executable out of the original one and placing that somewhere else. And this URL is where it's going to download it from up there. And it's going to save it. I can't remember if it saves it as the WinUp update manager or one of those executables. So that's what this malware is doing essentially. Is it's just pulling an exe out and then downloading another one and putting it somewhere. Because and it does that to mask the functionality of it. Because if you remember, and when we had it in PE Bear, there was no functions there that indicated that it had network connectivity. Nothing in there was open URL, anything like that. So it's actually the second executable that's buried within that's actually downloading the malware from another server. So this is a very simple example that's pretty benign. That's why I kind of picked this. And again, it's from the Practical Malware Analysis book that I had in the resource slot. That's awesome if you're into this stuff. But yeah, are there any other questions? And for those of you that couldn't get it set up, or if I went a little too fast, feel free to go back. We're about to run out of time, so I wanted to kind of briefly cover it. But feel free to go back and watch the video. And if you have questions, feel free to ping me or some of the other officers in the Discord, and I'll be happy to walk through with anybody. But yeah, John, do you want to come give your plug real quick before? Yes.
So I was actually going to give a bit more of a talk on kind of go into just briefly some kind of basic digital forensic stuff like disk and memory forensics and why you would use those and what you can get from them. But we're basically out of time, so so I don't know. I don't know if
we may do that.
I may cover it at the beginning of the next lecture or some other thing. I'm not sure. So hopefully you'll get to hear that eventually. But I just want to say this before. So if any of kind of the stuff discussed today, or if you have an interest in say defensive security, or you want to learn more about it, there's actually a competition that we've done for 2 years now. This upcoming year will be our third year doing it. It's called the Southeast Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition, SEC CDC. We just call it SecDec. It's easy. But it's a blue team focused competition where basically they will hand you a network and say, all right, here's a network with all these really old, outdated operating systems. You get Windows Server 2008 and Ubuntu 12. All right, now here's this thing. You get 30 minutes to secure it, and then we have a team of professional red teamers, people that companies will pay to break into their systems and find vulnerabilities and stuff. You have a whole team of those that they're all right, now they gotta have start attacking your network. Obviously they ramp it up. They don't immediately destroy everything, but they have all these little sneaky hidden backdoors. They might have an extra user. I know one thing that got us one year was our first year on the domain controller server. They had I believe admin was the credentials that we were given, but they had another account called administrator that we missed. So they just logged in with administrator and just wiped everything and shut down our network completely.
The low-hanging fruit all the way down to binary shipping and stuff.
Yeah, and so it's really a lot of fun. Like I said, you will get destroyed pretty much, but they own everyone. But you really learn a lot from it. You learn a lot about Windows and Linux administration, stuff what logs are kind of important to keep in mind, or finding things okay, how do we make backups where we can back up stuff like important services to certain areas where they say if they get in and delete like the service that we're supposed to have running, we can pull it from that backup location and load it again, and then like see how they got in and try to keep them from getting in that way. So it's a lot of fun. Really enjoy it. You get memed on a lot by the attackers. It's a fun time. But I'll probably send out I think when to meet might be the best thing. I'll probably send that out like tomorrow. Just you guys could just kind of fill it out. I just kind of want to get a gauge of when we're going to kind of start having training sessions, which will probably be like 1 to 2 hour time frames of just kind of having like some of the professors. Like I think we might try to have Jason Cuneo and like Dr. Springall give some of the talks. We might try to get a couple other people too from like maybe Los Alamos National Labs or other places to help kind of instruct us. But I just kind of wanted to get a feel for, I may not be able to accommodate every single person's schedule, but just kind of see like when people are most available.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, if you want to come to train just to learn, you can do like you don't
Yeah.
have to compete. If you want to come just to learn, then great. And if you decide you want to compete, great. But if you want to come
Yeah,
just to learn,
and
that's
I was going to say that too. Yeah, like the training things are not really, okay, if you come to this, you're competing. It's, you come, is this something you would enjoy? Would you want to compete? If not, that's completely fine. You can still keep coming to them and just learn. If you want to compete, cool. Like, we kind of need to start getting a team together. A lot of people that competed past like 2 years are now all grad students, and you can only have a max of 2 grad students. So we kind of need people. So, but yeah, no, it's really a lot of fun. You learn a lot from it. So I highly recommend it. But yeah, like I said, I'll just be sending that out like probably tomorrow-ish. Probably just via the Discord, probably an announcement or something. And like I said, just to get a gauge of probably when I can kind of try to start coordinating that. So, yeah, cool. Well, I guess we're kind of out of time for today. So
yeah. Thanks guys for coming. Yeah.
yeah,
Hope you learned something. Took something away from it.
yeah. Hopefully, kind of give you an idea. And then I think next week we're going to be kind of continuing the cyber boot camp. But like I said, we may cover like a bit of the digital forensics stuff at the beginning. But we're planning on doing more like red team and offensive security. So like penetration testing, social engineering, OSINT. So that'll also be pretty fun. So yeah. I don't know what to stop the stream. I don't want to break it.
Yeah, so we have an entire. Hit the green thing that looks